Good afternoon, everyone. I am Adolfo Carrillo Cabello, and I'm a technology-enhanced language learning specialist at the University of Minnesota, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our first session for the Language Collaboratory. The Language Collaboratory is a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators in the teaching of languages and literatures. Our series this fall aims at furthering conversations on the topic of student engagement. We address this issue from two perspectives: one, research, and two, pedagogical and practical. We aim to share insights and to encourage interinstitutional dialogue, bridging the institutional distance and fostering a collaborative interchange of ideas. You are invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion. Before we get started, I just want to highlight a few housekeeping items. If you want to ask a question at any time, you are welcome to type those in the chat. You are also welcome to ask your question live by raising your hand. And you can access this feature either by going to the participant list and select raise hand, or depending on the version of Zoom that you have, it may be available from the reactions button on the lower menu of your screen. This session is being recorded and will later be shared at each institution's website. Live transcription is available. You can access the live transcript by clicking on transcript on the lower menu of your screen. I'm very pleased to welcome our discussant today, Dr. Jana Martin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who will be talking us about the definition of student engagement and providing an overview of this topic and the current state of affairs in research. Before I pass it on to my colleague, Jana, I wanted to remind you of our upcoming session, which is next week, Monday, October 4th, the same time, and our presenter comes from the University of Arizona. We are gonna have 4 guest speakers for this series, and our first one will be next week, Professor Chantel Warner, who will be telling us about multiliteracies and in the language classroom. Without further ado, I'll now pass it on to our presenter today, our discussant today, Dr. Jana Martin. Jana.
Hello, everyone. Just let me see if you can see my PowerPoint. Adolfo, it might be. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you very much. So thank you so much to all of you for coming. It's really a wonderful afternoon here in Madison. I hope you have, or you're enjoying your day at your locations as well. We are going to pick it up where we left it off at the end of the spring in 2020, when we did, I would say, a series of 10 or 11 collaboratory sessions on a different topic. This one, as with a pause through the summer, is going to be on the theme of student engagement. And it's, I don't know about you, but we were talking before the session, this semester is still pretty busy for us. So it's still pretty chaotic. It's in many senses, it's a little bit more complicated than what we experienced in the spring. So with that said, thank you again for being here, because I know you could be in zillion other places. Before I start to talk about this kind of general overview of the research on engagement, I would like to ask you first, those of you who are here. So if you could please express and share with the group that's here, what do you associate with the concept of student engagement? What comes to your mind when you imagine an engaged student or engaged group of students? If you could please go to menti.com and type in the code 368765559. Kristen, if you wouldn't mind to put that in the chat, or actually I can. So I just go to menti.com and then 36876559. You'll be asked to submit the code. And after that, just please put in 3 keywords or short phrases that describe student engagement, or how would you describe student engagement? And I'll stop sharing this and start sharing the Menti. So I'll just gonna give you a minute or so. And as you noticed, you can enter the keywords more than once. Again, how do you see student engagement? What do you associate with the concept of student engagement? Okay, let's give it another 30 seconds. We have so far 8 people joining us. So just go to menti.com, just click on another tab on your browser, and then putting the code 36876559. Excellent. So what we can see is it goes by weight, right? So we see participation, active participation, interest, interaction, commitment, listening. And I think connection, digital interaction, commitment, motivation, participatory, task engagement, awareness. Excellent. I'll just keep this image in your minds as I go through the research. A lot of these concepts, a lot of these terms we'll be running into. Oh, creation, that's an interesting one. So I'm gonna stop sharing this again and go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So with that, and with that image in mind, I think, thank you so much. I think as a group, we have a pretty nice image of engagement as it comes to us. If you did not put in certain keywords, your colleagues did. So, and I believe if there were more of us here, they would be more robust, but I think we hit the key points. I would start this presentation with going back to year 2000. And I'll start with Zoltan Dernier, whose work you probably know from the field of motivation. And also I will address his co-writer or co-author of the article in this year and this is Judith Kormusch from the Lancaster University. Zoltan Dernier is from University of Nottingham. They were researching the role of individual and social variables in oral task performance. Here we see the link of student engagement and a focus on a task or the task engagement. They research different components of engagement and different factors that would influence engagement and affect engagement. At the end of their research, they came to a very strong conclusion that active learner engagement is one of the key concerns for instructed language learning. With all the factors that would come into play. The other key concerns included purposeful communication and authenticity. So authenticity and purposeful communication in connection with engagement. After this was written, starting year 2000, the research on engagement pretty much exploded. different people were looking at different factors. There was a lot of research on how to operationalize engagement, how to look at different theories that would support it. There was a lot of classroom research happening, and especially in a narrow sense, looking at engagement and also in connection to other concepts of language learning and teaching, especially motivation. So let's go next to a term that was coined by Agatha Svalberg from University of Leicester from United Kingdom. She has proposed the conceptual construct of engagement with language as a framework for exploring how learners build their language awareness. She was looking at language awareness and it's not something that is static, but rather that it's a state of being consciously aware or being consciously sensitive. With engagement, she took it a little bit further, looking at the learner acting as a subject and then language being an object or means of communication. She recognized different facets of engagement, one being cognitive, which includes focused reflection and problem-solving behavior. And the second was affect, active willingness to interact with the language or interlocutor, and then social, initiation and positive responses to interaction. When we look at the cognitive, social, and affective aspects of engagement, these also included in this particular article, notions such as attention, autonomy, and agency. And of course, engagement was looked upon as not just a separate construct, but as a more holistic in nature. So then when she looked at what facilitates or impedes such engagement, she noted various intrapersonal, interpersonal, and contextual variables, as well as potential that she noticed that the same variable can inhibit one learner's engagement, but foster it in another. And we will come to that when we actually do research and when I mentioned research towards the end of this talk. The next up is learner engagement in connection with perceived meaningfulness. Again, Agatha Svalberg, this is now almost a decade later. She continued her research in language engagement and noted that meaningfulness is one item that one should focus on. Meaningfulness can be achieved through purposefulness, utility, and enjoyment with different tasks, especially when we're looking at different tasks. I should note that in the beginning, in the past, I would say 10, 15 years, the focus of the research on engagement was mostly related to engagement with tasks. And also it was more focused on cognitive versus social and affective factors. If we try to define student engagement, here I'm switching to Sarah Mercer from University of Graz in Austria in year 2019, so about 2 years ago. She defines engagement as the key to successful language learning. It describes the dynamic state when learners are actively thinking about, focusing on, and enjoying their language learning. In order to be willing and ready to engage, learners need to be in the right frame of mind to do so. And in order to do that, the students must feel willing to engage with learning opportunities. Students and learners need to feel a sense of competence, autonomy, relatedness, sense of self, and be in the right mindset. This all can be done in a supportive, low anxiety community of peers and a teacher. And at the same time, when we're looking at engagement in this context, we understand it not as something that is isolated, but as something as a concept that plays with the concepts of motivation, that plays with the concept of self-determination. It's kind of like grounded in a self-determination theory, where we need to feel in charge of what we are doing. So again, the ideas of autonomy, the ideas of achieving competency and being active in doing so. Next up, when we're looking at engagement, we're looking at it not in the context of engagement with language, as it was before with Agatha Swalberg, but engagement with language learning. And here I would come back to Zoltan Dernier 20 years later, after the exploration of engagement in the first place and noting how important it was. Together with Sarah Mercer, they looked at the relationship of engagement with motivation. And this is, I mean, to me, it's really interesting because I followed Zoltan Dernier's work on motivation and I read a lot of practical books for language practitioners about group dynamics, motivation, how to create great atmosphere in a class, et cetera, and looking at different types of motivation, where it comes from and how to keep students motivated and all that. Now, when we're looking at engagement, how would those two play either against each other and how would they be related? So interestingly, when now he and Sarah Mercer are looking at motivation, they know that motivation does not manifest itself automatically in task pursuit. It only indicates the person's potential for successful learning. However, it doesn't mean that the task will be accomplished. It doesn't mean just because I'm motivated, and it can be, instrumentally or intrinsically or in any other way, that I will actually accomplish the task. We need to make sure as language educators that disposition of students, which is positive, let's say it's positive, that it's realized in action. And that's where the engagement comes into place. So in a sense, engagement is continuing the theme of motivation, whereas motivation functions as an impetus, but engagement takes it further into realization, into happening, into the true action. So the main benefit here now of exploring the notion of engagement over motivation is that allows us not to act in kind of for these two notions to be separate, but it addresses both the motive and the activation in a unified concept. So there are three main things that he noted about engagement. For one, it's active, has a direct link to concrete classroom behaviors. And here we note action versus potential, right? Potential is the motivation, action is the engagement. He also noted that students nowadays, and this is really true about the COVID situation last year, and now when everybody's coming back, there are so many distractions that even with the most highly motivated students, it's still difficult to turn that motivation into action. So that's where the engagement comes into place, because it is not only holistic when we're looking at a multitude of factors and we can acknowledge one and see how we can work with the other. It also fits in the complex dynamic systems as being something that is not necessarily unpredictable, but pretty complex. And this goes back to the work of Diane Larson Freeman in second language acquisition on the complex dynamic systems. Engagement, and the last part of this, in addition to being active and holistic, is practical because it resonates in the classroom. It's much more difficult for teacher practitioners to see, what motivates the student. Is this something that they need for a job, or would they like to get an internship, or are they intrinsically motivated? Engagement, one can notice on the spot. So we can see whether students are engaged, whether students are disengaged. We can consider the different factors. We can switch around the activities and see which ones would work in our context. And now I'm just going back, and I know there is about 10 minutes left, so I'll be wrapping up. The next one, when I'm looking at the student engagement, I'm looking at in a larger context. So I would recommend and highly recommend, there's a book written that was last year by Paul Hiver, is from University of Florida, Ali Al-Houri, Saudi Arabia, and also Sarah Mercer. When they're looking at student engagement in student engagement in a language classroom. And they're looking at bringing together, I mean, they edited this book. So they're looking at a mix of conceptual and empirical chapters that bring the idea of student engagement together with a lot of different concepts that happen in language learning and teaching. Chapters address broad substantive questions that concern with what engagement is or looks like, how it can be theorized for the language classroom. They address the methodological questions that relate to design, measurement, and analysis of engagement in language classroom and beyond, meaning this is not only addressing engagement in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom and in the community. They're also looking at factors that inhibit and enhance engagement and conditions that foster the re-engagement of language learners who have become disengaged. Because we know that during the course of a class, students can be engaged and they're disengaged, and then how do you really bring them back? So I would highly recommend the chapters are, there is a variety that's offered. So I think if you're interested in engagement, you will definitely enjoy this. And just the quote again on engagement, because I thought that it's quite fitting. Sang and Hiver in their chapter describe engagement as a form of energy characterized by enthusiasm, willingness, effortful expression, interest, and concentrated attention directed toward understanding, learning, or mastering the knowledge and skills necessary to be a competent language user. Here we have competency coming, we have the concentrated attention, focus, but also energy, enthusiasm. And we saw a lot of those keywords in the beginning when we were looking at what our group can do. Phil Hiver and the group also noted, for those of you who are more interested in research methodology and just kind of more theoretical ideas about engagement, in the language teaching research, in the article, you can see the review of the research that includes heterogeneous methods and a variety of conceptual frameworks. There's also recognition that one needs to refine the definition, since, as you saw, the engagement, many people do not see it as a broad of a concept. On the other hand, other researchers do. We can look at engagement in a narrow sense as it relates to task. We can look at engagement as it relates to, for example, assessment. So probably a better understanding and a clearer definition, and also operationalization of engagement is needed. And to that, I just would like to note a study, and this speaks directly to operationalizing of student engagement and research. There's a research study happening at University of Wisconsin-Madison that I'm a part of. We do have two or one research team members present here. Our study was interested in speaking proficiency outcomes of face-to-face and online US intensive post-secondary summer programs in less than least commonly taught foreign languages, with the principal investigator, Jana Murphy, who is the Language Institute director and kind of like the person behind this whole study. Aside from the main task of the study, I'm just going to address the point that goes towards the engagement. We thought that once we're going to have those students available to us, we might as well ask them a question, since we were interested in engagement and in student engagement specifically. What is the relationship, if any, between students' self-reported language engagement and then their speaking proficiency outcomes in intensive? This is summer electoral programs. And I just might know that this study was done in collaboration with the Wisconsin Intensive Summer Language Institute, and it's funded by the US Department of Education. It's a Title VI International Research and Studies program. I'd just like to address that it was a real pain to develop language use and engagement journal, even though we were inspired by already existing literature. But to that, I would like to probably invite Felicia, who's an invaluable team member, if she wouldn't mind saying a few words as far as what does it really take to look at engagement and develop an instrument where we technically actually can measure how engaged students are.
Well, thank you, Jana. And the study that Jana has mentioned is in the chat. So you can go to the link and get to the study page there. But as Jana mentioned, our instruments that we used were the language use and engagement journal and the interviews. And so as part of the study, students completed a weekly language use journal where they summarized or they indicated what activities that they were involved in to help develop their speaking abilities, but then also to report their engagement. And what we did is we asked them to indicate on those activities or additional activities that they selected when they felt fully engaged. And I'll just read a quote from the questionnaire. Please think of the term engaged as an overall concept, with fully engaged meaning that you are actively paying attention and that you are fully present in your interaction with others. And in our interview script, we also built that out just a little bit more. So at the end of the study, we did an interview with participants and had them reflect on their level of engagement in different activities and included this definition. You might think of being fully engaged as actively paying attention and feeling focused, being present in your interaction with others, if applicable, and are so engrossed in what you're doing that you may not even know that time is passing.
Thank you, Felicia. And I know that just by anecdotal evidence, this was really helpful for the students to bring them on the same page with our understanding of engagement. And I think, especially in the interviews, it was very easy to get the information we needed from them. If we know that if you forget everything that's around you, that's when you were engaged. And then we got lots of data. So if you're interested in how this turns out, just stay tuned. There'll be more presentations on this. Lastly, I'd like to bring you all back, just like in the beginning and now, probably just in the chat. I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts on how do you as language educators inspire and support student engagement, and how do you keep your students engaged? And then the follow-up question, what tools do you use? And I know we'll be done in about 2 minutes, but as Collaboratories went in the spring, we are offering another 15 minutes for a discussion and conversation with the attendees. So those of you who have time and would like to engage now in a free discussion, please stay with us. Otherwise, we wish you a wonderful rest of the day. So I see a hand there, and May.
Jana, we have a question pending in the chat. I don't know if you want to address it before we open questions from the floor.
Oh yeah, sure. If you wouldn't mind reading it, I don't get to see this.
Caitlin, I pass it on to you.
Absolutely.
Stop
I just
sharing, then I can
find
see
it again in the chat. Give me 1 second.
Oh, let me see.
I scrolled away from it by accident. So we had a question from Beth.
Okay.
Could you give an example of a task or strategy that Hiver recommends in that student engagement in the language classroom?
So what I would say to that, this is in edit book. There is about 20 chapters that some of them are on the practical side, some of them are more on the research and methodology end of it. So I would say, as far as examples or tasks or strategy, you have different strategies depending on what topic is being discussed. So there's a topic on assessment, there's a topic on, there might actually be something on games and bringing in technology. So it really depends on what the authors were addressing with respect to engagement. But as practical, most of the articles and books that I mentioned today have some really concrete, practical information that is would be helpful for practitioners. And I can then provide you with a list of references to that, just kind of citations. Okay, let's open it up. Anyone? If you have, and here we go.
Sorry, Anna, to interrupt. It looks like May had a question.
Yes.
And
thank you, Caitlin. If you can facilitate,
yes,
it'd be great.
Yep, no problem.
I don't have a question. I just going to answer what Jana has put about how do you, a language educator, inspire and support the student engagement. I would say something has changed in our teaching pedagogy because of the COVID. The assessment has affected that a lot through the engagement. Classroom engagement used to be different, and part of it was based a lot into quizzes, into exams. Now everything has changed. It becomes more holistic, and the engagement started to be also different. I'll give you an example. I give a student now a project to do rather than to give them exams. So I give them to work as a group and work as an individual. One of the things that I did last week, I make them do a live recording about a topic with a third year, which was about helping having an interview with someone who's supposed to work in a community center to collect the clothes for a student in need. So the student loved that a lot. I've never done that before COVID, but I'm thinking about new ways of teaching and new ways to help a student to get more engaged, more motivated. And I think the COVID was a bad thing, but at the same time was good things because it changed our methodology and our assessment. So my assessment it was focusing on the small things. There was a classroom engagement, but I don't think it was motivated as now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Do we have a note in the chat or in?
I'd like to invite more questions. As Adolfo has said in the chat, you can add them in the chat. You can raise your hand. I have one, but I'm kind of holding off to see if someone else has one first. I'm going to go with my question. Okay. Here's my question, Jana. And it's kind of a two-part question. Forgive me. It kind of feels that engagement is this very elusive and tricky thing. And we have to get all of the stars to align to really get all of the parts that we think are idealized, right? In this idealized student engagement scenario. What do we do with that? What if we don't have the idealized, all of the stars aligning? What would you recommend, or what would you, maybe from this research that you've looked into, where would you suggest that we start, at least?
I think you start with your intuition as a teacher, in my view. I think everybody, if you ever taught a class, you do notice right away whether students are disengaged or whether they're looking at you. You know, there's a lot of that you can pick up from a bunch of bodies sitting in front of you. So you can see whether their voices are excited, whether they're looking at you, whether they're writing something in their notes, or whether they're on their phone or whatnot. So it's that of course it can be learned. That's why people go in and learn to be teachers, how to engage students, right? So I think it's all the different strategies that you learn, how to bring in students into the class. But and again, from the interviews, when I interviewed the students this summer, and when we asked them, when and how do you specifically feel engaged? What makes you feel engaged? How do you feel internally? And we tried them to define what makes them engaged. And what they were answering, at least what I was picking up on, was the notion of having fun, the notion of accountability, the notion that they did not want to look kind of silly in front of their peers. And when they worked in groups, they didn't want to disappoint. And this happened more than once. This is at least 4 students told me this, that they really didn't want to disappoint their group because others already put so much time into it that they needed to feel really engaged. For one, listening, and that was a great word in the beginning. So listening to what others had to say, so then they can appropriately react and be a part of the conversation, right? Or kind of like be part of the class. And another one was enjoyment, fun, for sure. And then that feeling of, yeah, I really want it to be personal. I want something that relates to my life. So that comes from, other studies as well, but these are kind of like the the main motifs that we're running through students' answers. And so as teachers or as instructors, if we can, maybe I don't want to say personalize, but approach teaching with more personal topics that relate to students more and pick up on those cues in the class. Just don't go with something over and over now that we have them in person, some of us, right? I think it's a little easier to pick up on that and then just take it from there and adjust instruction or activities or whatnot. And yes, we do have some really interesting results because we did give them activities and had them select which ones are more engaging than others. So yeah, interesting data are coming out. Anyone else?
Sorry, I muted myself. Go ahead, Jana.
Yeah, just the question is, are there any specific tools that any one of you are using to get students engaged? And thank you, Vanessa, for your note. And I'm just gonna read it to everyone. She has the students assign roles to each member in a group when working collaboratively. So everyone can focus on one part. Timekeeper, facilitator, recorder, reporter, and this keeps them engaged and holds them accountable. And that's exactly what I was saying. The students feel that they are accountable for what they do because they don't want to disappoint their peers, which I was kind of surprised by that they are picking up on that it's also on their minds. And Linda, thank you, Linda. She's mentioning taking their interest and learning beyond the walls of the classroom. Yes. And that's what they were saying too, that they would like to learn something that matters to them. So when they're learning language, it would be in the context that matters to them. They don't want to be, yeah, one of them, and this is in a different study, that I don't really want to know words for every piece of the furniture when I'm really interested in this. So it's those parts that, you know.
We can continue this line of conversation, but I do want to point out or remind you that we have our second session next week, same time, October 4th. Professor Chantel Warner from the University of Arizona will join us. And I want to thank everyone for coming, but this is certainly not the end. If we have any, Jana just asked for additional tools that we use. I like actually, Jana, your use of Menti, that was nice today.